Hello, my name is Daniel. Welcome to the channel, and I apologize for the ambiance today. It's really dark out. That's because we're having a thunderstorm. So I'm not trying to purposely be creepy, or am I? It's just that's the weather, and I can't control it. But I had a pretty good reading week and a half or so since I last talked to you. Um, just want to go over some of the stuff I've read before I start forgetting all the details about them. Um, so we're gonna go back to the end of February, where I was finishing an event called "Holmes is Where the Heart Is." It's where a bunch of booktubers and I were reading a bunch of Sherlock Holmes stories, and we had a prompt for each week. And the final week was read something inspired by Sherlock Holmes. And at first, I thought I didn't really have anything in my collection that's very good. I'm currently banned from buying books until I read 100 books that I already own. So I had to like root around in my collection. And I guess I did have more than I thought, but at the time, the only thing I could think of was to read this because it was sort of a mystery, I thought, and that is Star Trek: Who Killed Captain Kirk? And I thought this would be just like a graphic novel in and of itself about like someone supposedly killing Captain Kirk. But really, what this ended up being was just a collection of comics from the DC Star Trek line, and I never read these before, and I thought they were really good. There was a lot of interesting features. I guess this the majority of these comics take place after the movies, so they do the DC line starts with like adaptations of the Star Trek movies and then moves on to its own continuity with its own cast of characters. And from what I read here, it's really good, actually. So I was really down on the fact that that they never really fully collected this series into trades, because while I am trying to go digital with most comics I buy, Star Trek is an exception for me. I just love it too much. So I'm trying to get physical copies of everything I can. Unfortunately, I got into the game a little too late. If I had just started collecting comics and really getting into comics a few years ago, I could have gotten the entire Eagle Moss collection where they collected everything and put it into like hardbacks. Unfortunately, they went out of business right when I started getting into the comics. So I get what I can. But it turns out I do have digital representations of all of these, and that's because of the Star Trek Complete Comic Book Collection DVD. I I did find that I had a bunch of Star Trek comics on my computer, and I couldn't remember where they came from. I think that's where they came from. So I do have digital versions of all of this stuff. So I think later, when I'm not doing my 60s Marvel comic collection project, which is where I'm trying to read all of the 60s Marvel superhero comics that have been released into epic collections, I'm going to get it a little bit more into Star Trek. There's just a lot I want to read, and I just don't have time. So I'm already behind on the 60s Marvel comics, but I'll get back on it. So anyway, that was a tangent. This was really good. Most of it had nothing to do with the murder mystery, but you did have some really interesting concepts before they were introduced in shows like The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. This is a character called Moron. It's a Klingon human hybrid refugee. And apparently, they speculated that Klingons and humans couldn't really procreate without some physical genetic abnormalities. This series also has a Klingon crew member on the Enterprise. I can't remember his name, something like Korg or something. All Klingon names kind of sound the same. But yeah, it was really good. Like they were ahead of their time as far as telling Star Trek stories, and the fact that it's all like continuous is something that wasn't even represented in the shows until Deep Space Nine, where you have like ongoing story arcs. I loved it, but we didn't really get into the murder mystery until like at the very end of this comic, and we kind of see Captain Kirk get stabbed by a crewmate. And so it's like, where's the mystery? Well, it turns out it wasn't it wasn't a crewmate who did it. Spoiler, I guess, for this 1988 comic. If you are interested in reading it, I don't think this is gonna like really, you know, affect your experience, but they do tie the story into the episode Star Trek Whom Gods Destroy, and beyond that I'm not going to go into it further. But I really enjoyed this, but it didn't really like scratch the itch of like, you know, a Sherlock Holmesian mystery. So then I went onto my computer and pulled out the only comic of Star Trek I saw that featured Data as Sherlock Holmes. That was a constant thing they did on the Next Generation in the holodeck, where Commander Data was playing Sherlock Holmes and solving mysteries that way. This was a issue entitled "Embrace the Wolf," and that was a play off of an old Star Trek episode from the original series called "Wolf in the Fold." Wolf in the Fold, or a Wolf in the Fold, doesn't matter. It's features a character called Red Jack. It's like a nebulous entity that can possess you and cause you to eat murder, or it can like possess the ship itself. And it turns out like this was the entity that was Jack the Ripper, which is why he couldn't be caught in the Victorian times. So he goes to the, he's on this planet where he has called just a nuclear annihilation of the planet. And so the Enterprise crew comes and tries to find out what's going on. Why is this peaceful people like obliterating each other? And Red Jack gets into the Enterprise by way of Beverly Crusher and possesses the Enterprise once again and takes over the holodeck of all things and creates this like Victorian London and like manifests himself as this monstrous, like almost like Mr. Hyde-like creature. But I guess he's like a manifestation of every character Red Jack has played. And then he also hijacks the teleporter and starts teleporting crew members into the holodeck. And he teleports Data in there in the guise of Sherlock Holmes. And I guess Data is supposed to, you know, solve these murders and stuff before Red Jack like brutally kills all of the crew members. But again, there wasn't much of a mystery into it. It turned out to be more of an action plot. So that didn't really scratch the itch either. And then I remembered there was one book I had in a series I wanted to finish that does feature Sherlock Holmes, and that is Flashman and the Tiger by George MacDonald Frasier. This is a part of the Flashman series. It's actually the last of the chronological Flashman stories. In fact, it's 3 stories in one. It's a little different than the rest of the 11 Flashman novels, where he goes on this great epic grand adventure, usually overseas somewhere, or into like darkest Africa, Afghanistan, India, China. This is very domestic for the most part. It's comprised of 3 stories. The first story is The Road to Charing Cross, where Flashman is sort of enticed by way of very beautiful women to help this newspaper man steal the Treaty of Berlin before it is officially signed, to help this newspaper man get the scoop. And then years later, some of the people who he stole this treaty from sort of blackmail him into stopping the assassination plot. It's a really fun adventure. But this is not the one that features Sherlock Holmes, though it is excellent Flashman story. The second story is also not the Sherlock Holmes story. It's the second longest. It's called The Subtleties of Baccarat, where it's very different than any Flashman story in the fact that nothing is a life or death situation. Instead, there's this one military man who is at the same parties as Flashman and his wife, and he is accused of cheating at Baccarat, which is like notoriously hard to cheat on if you know the game. And Flashman discovers that he is truly innocent, but since he is a rogue and a rapscallion and doesn't like this man for reasons that he makes clear later on, he decides that he wants to do everything in his power to make this guy seem guilty to everyone else. Flashman is not a good good guy. He is a villain through and through, but he's kind of lovable in his just he's so honest about his villainy, and it just makes for really funny situations. And finally, the title piece, which is the shortest story in the lot, that is Flashman and the Tiger. This is a story about Flashman, who is now an old man, and he has a granddaughter who is blackmailed by a character called Tiger Jack, who is also a character in the Sherlock Holmes stories, The Adventure of the Empty House. And so Flashman discovers that he was someone he knew in a previous book that he had definitely wronged in his younger days, and this Tiger Jack just grew up to resent him completely and utterly. And so he's trying to blackmail his granddaughter into sleeping with him, or he will reveal some faux pas of her husband and ruin her life, or her fiance, and ruin her life. And so Flashman's like, there's nothing I can do. This guy is like one of the deadliest shots in the world. I'm gonna have to try to murder him like behind his back before he can sleep with my granddaughter. And so he's going through this whole crisis, and the events of the Adventure of the Empty House play out right before he's about to like pull that trigger. So he gets, I don't want to go too into detail, but it's very, very good story, I think. But also, it's a really good send off to the Flashman character, especially how it ends. But there's this really hilarious scene where he is pretending to be a drunk homeless man, and he's just lying in the gutter, and the characters of Sherlock Holmes and Watson stumble across him, and Sherlock's making all these pronouncements about him and like the type of whiskey he is, and like obviously this man is a sailor, which Flashman is not, and he comes from Germany because of this and that, and Flashman's just getting super indignant, but he's pretending to be passed out so he can't say anything, and Watson's like, wow, brilliant, you're so brilliant, but like everything Sherlock Holmes says is wrong, which, I mean, if you're a big Sherlock fan, maybe that could annoy you, but it was really funny. So Flashman and the Tiger was a good send off to Holmes's Where the Heart Is, which was the only event I really took part of in February, other than my banned books project. For my second book I was supposed to read last month, I didn't finish it until early this month in March, but that is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. What to say about this book? This is like one of the most soft banned books. It was only banned in like a couple school systems, I believe. If I had done my homework beforehand, I could tell you where, but I slipped my mind to do that. But it was soft banned by being removed from schools, I believe. But this is not what I expected it to be. It was much more absurdist, really. I've never read it before. I knew a lot of friends in high school who said this book is amazing. I did not get that it was amazing. It was very entertaining, and the humor was very circular, almost who's on first, what's on second levels of like, misunderstanding between characters. And then a lot of the humor also deals in a lot of contradictions. So like the whole point is Catch-22 is like an unbeatable scenario. So the story is about a bunch of pilots in World War II who are trying to go home, essentially, but they're required to fly a certain number of missions. And I almost said upper management. What do you call that in the military? I'm just having a brain fart. But anyways, the higher ups in the military keep raising that number to impress like their counterparts. So it's the characters devise ways to sort of get out of doing these missions and try to get sent home. And they spend a lot of time in hospital, especially the main character, who's Yossarian. He is constantly faking that he has this like liver condition, so he can go sit in the hospital for days, and like just because he's just terrified of dying. And there's a lot of ennui in this novel where like every woman is a prostitute, which I think the sexual stuff is what got this book banned. And calling women whores, which they were. Not all women, but like a lot of the women here were whoring. That was just what happened during this time. But anyway, things were both equally absurdist and depressing. So it's like a tragic comedy. Um, and there were some scenarios where it just reminded me a whole lot of Kafka's The Trial, which I love. But like this book, with its style of humor, it wore thin after a while. And I think this book would have been much more powerful if it was about that long. Like, cut it in half. Like, a lot of it lost its shine over time. It could just be because, like, when I was reading this, I was also dealing with a 2-day migraine, which is not, like, something that makes you want to read a lot of humor, at least for me. Like, maybe I'm just too grumpy for it. But, because when I started off, I'm like, oh, this is really fun. It's going down smooth. But, like, unless you finish it in, like, 2 days, I think it took me, like, 3 or 4, I was just like, I'm so done with this story. Oh, look, it's another, like, the jokes become predictable, and you don't want that in humor. Could be because I've grown up on literature and media that has been inspired by this, maybe. That could be some of it, but I just wish it were shorter because it had some really laugh out loud moments. I'm not going to say I don't recommend it, but I just wish it was abridged a little bit. So Catch-22, I'm sorry if you're a huge fan. It's good. It's just, it wasn't for me at the time. I'm going to hang on to it, though, because I think I will grow to appreciate it more now that I know what I'm getting into. I think part of it is I was trying to get it read for the project, so, like, it wasn't what my mood was for, and therefore I think the book suffered a little bit because of that. So that's a little bit on me as well. But then I read something also weird that that I was definitely in the mood for. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this because the cover is really not made for Kindle and there's a lot of glare happening. But I read The Patient Routine by Luna Ray Hall. This is kind of a mixture of a poem, or like what we consider modern poetry, because it's not following any sort of style. It's a book about, wow, it's really hard to hard to describe. It's about a hypochondriac, trans. It's a hypochondriac, definitely someone who's possibly psychotic, who's also trans, who is trying to go to the hospital because they feel like they have this ailment. They have this lump on their neck, and they also like think they could be dying from any other multitude of symptoms that they have. They really have this doctor who's very understanding. They really cling to them, and so they go to the hospital, and then things start happening. Weird things start happening, and you never are quite sure if it's happening in reality or in their head. Like, the hospital gets locked down. They go into the bathroom, and there's a lot of body horror in this. So they go into the bathroom, and like that lump on their neck just starts sprouting legs, and this bug comes out of them, and then suddenly, like, there's no evidence of a lump at all, and they're kind of regulars at this hospital, so they're just watching as everyone is going in and being seen. They're being left more and more alone. I guess they bring in this body that's really mangled, kind of missing all of its skin, or most of its skin, but it's still alive. And then suddenly they're under a quarantine, and they lock the hospital, and then weird stuff starts happening from there. And at first, it's almost like it's going to be a zombie story, but then it goes different directions, and you're never really quite sure what's going to happen. And then it sort of becomes a metaphor for the trans experience, I think. But I'm not 100% sure all of my thoughts on this book. I don't know if the poetical style really works for me. A lot of it is like, a lot of words repeated over and over again, or just like spread out on the page oddly. I don't know if that part of the book worked for me, but I really liked the emotions it made you feel during the course of the book. It's a very quick read, even though it's like 220 pages. Those aren't always full pages, so it was nice. It was different, but like it didn't have the problem that Catch-22 had for me, where yeah, it's different and it's experimental, but it's not overstaying its welcome. Like this book was like the perfect length for what it was, um, and I think that is key to its success. So it's kind of making me a little bit nervous about reading House of Leaves because that is a very long book for another experimental style. So we'll see. Um, Something I'm reading right now is this: The Sea Beast Takes a Lover. This is just a bunch of short stories by Michael Anderson, and only in a little bit so far, but the first story was just really good. Again, a weird book where the first story is like a speculative fiction of like what if we took our old people at a certain point where the children decided that their time is now, and then we all just put them in a big crate and dump them in the ocean. And then he just runs with that and tells like a heartfelt story with that as the premise of the world, and it was really like emotionally well done. I liked it a lot. But like though I really like it in books when something ridiculous is just treated as mundane, and then you can build a story off of anything. So like I'm really interested in seeing the other weird twists that this author takes. I think this book, based on what I've read on reviews, has a lot of weird fiction like that. So that is also good because short stories you can go nuts with a short story. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but I won't be like just like, all right, can we just be done with this? So having a really good month this month. I'm also reading again the complete works of Plato. I don't talk about it much, but I am working my way through that. It's just taking longer than I thought because I have to really be in the mood for it. But during a thunderstorm at like midnight, apparently is when my body's decided, yeah, I want to read some Plato. So who knew? But that's it for now. I'm gonna try this week. I think I'm gonna try to catch up on some tags that I've been tagged in. I'm really bad at doing tags. I just don't think to. So I know some of you had tagged me to do some I keep saying the word tag, but to do some tags for the channel, and I appreciate it. I'm just really bad at following up on them, so I will try to do that soon. Beyond that, I'm just gonna keep reading some weird fiction because it's where apparently my mind wants to be. So I hope you have a good one, and I will talk to you later. Bye.